Thanks very much, and thanks very much, Mia. It's great to be able to speak after you, and hopefully what I say will complement what you've discussed as well. So, bringing things a bit closer to home, I guess. I do a cognitive neurology, a memory clinic every Monday morning at Charing Cross Hospital, which you can see there on the left. And unfortunately, the medications that I have available to me to treat patients on the NHS are ones that have been around for the best part of 20 to 30 years. Both of them have been shown repeatedly in clinical trials to make a difference, but that difference is small and it doesn't slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So when I see people and give them a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, I can start them on these treatments, but in the knowledge that it's not slowing their disease down and it's only going to make a relatively small difference to their symptoms. There have been huge advances in our understanding of Alzheimer's disease and its underlying pathology. And these are two sort of seminal studies, really, from recent years showing that antibody drugs towards the protein amyloid can slow down the disease, but they have to be given relatively early in symptomatic disease. And also they're very expensive. And that slowing down is a modest effect at best. So this is the beginning of our treatments for Alzheimer's disease and being able to modify disease, but there needs to be a lot more work yet. And what we know, and I think this complements what Mia was saying quite a lot, is we know that the processes that cause Alzheimer's disease begin up to 2 decades before symptoms start. So in the period before people are patients, when they are developing these proteins, one called amyloid and one called tau, that is when this disease modification is most likely to work. And that is where more and more trials and more therapeutic approaches are being targeted. So the majority of work is going earlier and earlier in the course of disease. And on the right-hand side, you can see all the trials that are taking place in Alzheimer's disease at the moment. Each of those little dots is one trial, and most of them are getting to earlier and earlier stages rather than when people are patients and when they have a diagnosis. One of those dots, if I can show you with my pointer, there in the middle, on the left-hand side, is a trial that I've been running over the last few years at Charing Cross Hospital. And that's what we call a repurposing study. So that's where you take a drug that's been licensed for another condition, in this case, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and you see if it works in another context. So we've taken this drug, guanfacine, which has been shown to work in childhood ADHD and is licensed for that. And we've been testing it for people who have clinical Alzheimer's disease. And on the right, you can see some of the people who've been in the team doing that with me at Charing Cross, as well as Rob Howard and Kath Mummery, who are both on the wider steering and data monitoring committees for this trial that we've been running over several years. And the drug itself has been provided by initially Shire Pharmaceuticals, which was then taken over by a company called Takeda. And it's taken us quite a few years to do this. So the first year when I applied for funding was 2015. And then we actually started the trial in 2019 after getting all the contracts and approvals in place. And as you might imagine, we were slowed down a bit by COVID, but we finished at the end of the last year and the results will be coming out soon. And what I want to say is not really about the results of the trial, but it's about that sort of approach to testing treatments. As you could hear from what I was saying, it took a long time to do the trial. And we built a team that could deliver all the aspects of the trial, from the ethics, from the approvals, to actually testing patients, getting the pharmacy ready. And now that the trial's over, that team disbands. So it's the equivalent, as one of my colleagues has said, of building a stadium for one match and then taking it all down again. And that sort of approach is really standard for trials. So where you're comparing a drug with a placebo, you carry out the trial, you stop, you announce the results, and then you think about what the next one is going to be. And it's very, very inefficient. And not only is it inefficient, but the sort of outcomes we use in Alzheimer's are all pen and paper tests, or at best, they're pen and paper tests that have been transferred to an iPad without really thinking about what people do in modern day life. So it's asking about the questions are things like asking about signing a check rather than checking your phone. And as you can probably hear from my voice, I'm particularly over-invested in the trial that I've run, so that I want to see it out to the conclusion, even if evidence starts to come in that it's not going to work. So we need to be a lot more efficient in how we carry out this sort of study. And one way we might be able to do that is testing more than one thing in one time. And rather than having a single trial, we think in terms of what we call a platform trial. So we can test a number of arms, different treatments at a time. And here you can see treatment A, treatment B, treatment C. But an important aspect of this sort of approach is if we think that something's not working, if we have no evidence that it's helping people at all, we don't continue through to the bitter end, but we stop and try a new treatment, in this case, treatment D. So we're testing regularly to see if there's any evidence at all that things are working. And if they're not, we stop the arm and try something else. So you have a rolling trial, if you like, where you're not disbanding a team after testing each thing, and you're always trying to give patients the option of taking part in research and having the opportunity to be exposed to the most recent treatments and upcoming therapies. And this has been a standard approach in cancer for many years. So what I'm showing you here is the schematic for what's called the STAMPEDE trial in prostate cancer, which began in around 2005 and finished in 2023, actually. And each of these things going down from A to L is a different arm of the trial. And this trial, run in the UK and headed up by this man, Max Palmer, who's based at University College London. This trial changed practice 4 or 5 times during the course of it going on. So people were changed and exposed to different treatments, which eventually were approved and went into the NHS because of this study itself. And STAMPEDE 2 is just about to start. So this sort of approach, the platform trial, has been going on quite a while in cancer, and then really came to the fore in the UK during the COVID pandemic with studies like Recovery. And it's also been tested in some neurological and neurodegenerative conditions too. So Max Palmer, whom I showed you on the last slide, has also been involved in these 2 trials, one for motor neuron disease, MND SMART, and one for progressive multiple sclerosis, Octopus. And both of these have started in the same way as the trial I showed you before, the one testing guanfacine, the ADHD treatment, in that they're repurposing studies. They're testing drugs that have been found to work in other conditions and then seeing if they work in the context of A, motor neuron disease, and B, progressive MS. And Max and colleagues have formed a group called Accord, which is a collaboration of different groups from across the UK who run these types of studies. So as well as motor neuron disease and progressive MS, there's also a trial due to start in Parkinson's disease. And what we've been discussing through Accord and also through a group called Dementia's Platform UK is trying to set this up in clinical Alzheimer's disease. So that's for the group of people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in a clinic and are given one of those 2 drugs that I showed you at the very start. And then we're trying to repurpose to start with and see what treatments might work for these individuals. And we've tried to assemble a team from across the UK. So on the right there, you have people from London, from Bristol, from Edinburgh, from Cambridge, from Oxford, from Sheffield, from Newcastle, many other places. And together we're building a collaboration so that we can start this trial off and we can look and see if people have a response at 18 months after treatment, so that seeing if we can have a sustained response on symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And we'll use outcome measures that are standard, so that ones that we know will work for measuring Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And we will also try to use scans and blood tests to help us understand what's going on. And I'd like to stress again that this is for people who are patients, and it will include people not only who have what's called mild cognitive impairment, but also people who have dementia as well. So we need to make sure that our study is fit for individuals who have those problems. And on the left, you can see those people are the core members of the team, and I'm just going to go through the different aspects of what we've been doing over the last year or two with the support of Alzheimer's Research UK. So the design of our trial is roughly this, that we'll start with 3 arms, one with placebo, then one treatment, and then another treatment, so arm A and arm B. And then at some point over the first 2 years of the trial, we'll start a 3rd treatment arm. And we'll have roughly 300 people in each of these arms. So that's over 1,000 people in total. And we've had funding from the National Institute of Health and Care Research to start designing this and preparing this. So we've had the Accord group, whom I've mentioned already. We've got Dementia's Platform UK. We've got all the people in these photographs on the slide. And it's also very important that we've involved patients and public in how we've designed things. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. So over the last 8 months or so, we've been using this funding to choose the drugs that we'll start with, to think about how we make our outcome measures better, and to make sure we've got the right numbers of people so that if there's a meaningful effect on symptoms, we'll find it. So the first aspect of what I want to show you is the prioritization program. And on the top right there, you can see Suzanne Reeves, who's a professor of pharmacology and psychiatry at University College London. And she led an international panel to go through proposals for drugs that we might use at this stage. And so we asked the wider community what drugs might work. And interestingly for me as well, that one of those drugs that was chosen was metformin, which shows that there is consistency in the Alzheimer's disease community. And then another is atomoxetine, interestingly, another ADHD drug. And I'm pleased to say that our panel all chose one of these drugs, and we ranked them, and then they re-chose the drugs afterwards. So they had a short list, and then we went through the short list to choose our top drugs. And the idea behind this sort of process is that we do it year on year to see what's coming through. So as Mia mentioned, as drugs come through, for instance, the newer diabetes drugs, we can think about whether they'd fit in a platform like this and how we adapt our platform to improve it and make sure we can try the best drugs that are available. I've mentioned outcome measures, and what's critical for anybody who's conducted a trial or been part of a trial for dementia patients is that we make these outcome measures acceptable to people and their families. So these people will often be coming through to a clinic and having to spend at least an hour doing test after test, which is hard enough without the burden of dementia and the difficulties and the stress that it causes. Not only that, but often they're designed for people who speak English as a first language, and things are more difficult for people who live further away from the big centres. So one of the things we've been talking about, especially with Ross Dunn, who's based in Manchester and who's there in the photo on the right, is how we make sure we choose the best things, the most up-to-date measures for our participants. And people are very keen on digital measures and using new outcomes and new ways, phones, iPads, other sorts of ways of measuring symptoms. What we want to make sure is if we include these, they are not extra burden for participants and everybody can access these. So there is no point having a fancy computerized test if only 10% of the patients who are taking part in your trial can actually do it. So he's leading another panel which will go through available sort of novel digital outcome measures, and then we'll choose the best ones to go into the trial, but make sure that they're acceptable to participants and their families. And I've mentioned participants and their families quite a lot. And the NIHR, the National Institute for Health and Care Research, is very keen on this, but understandably so. We have to have patient and public involvement in every aspect of what we do, from the design, through the drug selection, through the selection of the outcome measures, all the way through to how we disseminate the findings of our research. And at the top there, Ben Underwood from Cambridge and Linda Poynton, who has lived experience of dementia, and Zunira Khan, based at King's College London, have all helped us in this. And I've put a QR code there for what's called the POPT website, which Ben, Linda, and Zunira have set up, which is how we try to get input, not just from our PPI groups in the room, so 10 people who volunteered and who have the time to either join a Teams meeting or come to a university to give their opinions. But on a wider scale, we want to ask as many people as possible about what they think about what we're doing, not only about the drugs that we choose, but also about the outcome measures that we're using and how we conduct trials like these. And I hope that this POPT website, which Ben has set up, really changes the way we carry out PPIE so we can get more information about how we do dementia research at scale. So just to conclude, really, the trial that we're going to run is called AD SMART, and you can see that that stands for Alzheimer's Disease Systematic Multi-Arm Adaptive Randomized Trial. But basically, that means what I've just described to you. We're going to make it as flexible and participant-friendly as possible. And we were going to use the blood biomarkers that Mia mentioned, and we're going to work with all the UK networks and initiatives that have been set up over the last few years to make sure that dementia trials move faster and more efficiently. And we're going to fit in with the wider ecosystem and infrastructure that's been built around us. And on that, I'd just like to finish and thank the people and the charities, as well as the funders who've been involved in all this. But if there's one thing or two things I'd like you to do is, one is go to Join Dementia Research and register, whether or not you have dementia or know someone with dementia. The only way we can improve the way we do research is by participating and volunteering to participate. And two, to have a look at the POPT website, which I showed you the QR code for earlier, and there's the address for it there, so that you can give your opinion on how we're trying to carry out this trial and set it up.